Running Sentences presents a short story bonus episode. Witch's Brew. A witch and her assistant work on a spell to help out a young man who has come to them. He doesn't know he needs help, but help is what he's going to get. This is a work of fiction. Any names, characters, businesses, events, and situations within this story are products of the author's imagination. Any resemblance to real people, situations, events, characters, businesses, and so on is purely coincidental. Story written and narrated by Michael Honnery. Copyright 2023, Michael Honnery. All rights reserved. Eden walked the path he'd known many times before. It was a small dirt thing that cut its way through the woods from town to the farmland his parents owned. He was on a journey back home, mind deep in thought, and worried mostly about the mayor's daughter, and not actually about farming. She, he had reliably been told, was planning on doing something to him when he least expected it. In his mind, that screamed of a murder plot in this age of not-so-greatness. But then again, everyone said he read too many books about everything, so they claimed his imagination ran away from him the last time he claimed a dragon was coming to town. It had sort of shown up, but it then promptly vanished. His feet crunched against the ground, disturbing leaves and branches where there should be none. A glance up from his deep stare at nothingness made him shake his head as he realized he was no longer on the path he thought he was. Around him were trees and rocks all about, but no dirt path to be seen. There was a clear-cut line in the woods, though. Maybe it was a former path, or maybe it wasn't. It stood in front of him, but it wasn't his path. He would look about the place and saw up ahead, and slightly to the left, there was a clearing that was in view. He hoped maybe that was actually the way he was going, and he hadn't noticed this overgrown section before. He usually didn't notice things when he was in the woods. He just walked. With heavy steps, he went that way, trying to ward off any lurking creatures that might take an interest in him as he went to this clearing ahead of him. It was only a few feet away, but as always, he told himself it was better to let them know that you were here than to be surprised by their sudden appearance. He picked up and hit a wooden stick against anything that resembled a rock or tree that got close enough to be hit, just as a fair warning. He found himself at a clearing that was rather small and was thick with vines and plants that ate at the area that seemed to grow in a haphazard fashion around something. It looked like a shack of a house, but slightly overgrown, and something about him told it was a weird place. But there was also a clearly defined trail that went up towards it, so he took the only path through the woods and where it might potentially be. As he stepped onto this small path that was guarded by heavy thorn vines, he looked further about to see if he could locate his old path, just on his own, but he couldn't see anything, so. This path, there, was not like any he'd ever seen through these woods. Fear grew in him that he was being led away from where he wanted to go, but his feet were moving of their own accord, straight towards a building. A few feet later, he found himself in front of this house covered in vines, and that was snaked around by plants all over the place, and all the way up to the roof of this one-story thatch-looking building that reminded him a bit of a home, but not any he'd seen lately. He had seen the old abandoned farmhouse, and that was a one-story thatch building that had been taken over mostly by plants, but it looked gutted. This place didn't look that way. There was a feeling of darkness, followed by odd scents and music that came from inside this place, and it made him uneasy. He could make out the white walls that held this building together through all of the vines, and the brown door that wasn't all that big, but was surrounded and by those vines, and they seemed to push apart as he approached this door. What is this place, and who would live out here? Eden asked himself out loud as he took the final steps towards the door. He hadn't meant to walk up to it, but something felt like it was pulling him towards it. And since he was here, maybe they could help. So he knocked on the door, and it was now in front of him, and at least he could ask if they knew of a path that would lead him home. The sound of noise and falling objects, along with an unhappy screech from a cat, followed from inside. The door didn't open right away, and he was there trying to decide between leaving and knocking on it again when it did open. "Hello," he said before it had been fully pulled open. When it was, he found a pretty young woman who stood guarding the door, looking out at him. "Hello." She was just peeking around it, and he found himself a bit flustered and quite taken aback by the sight, trying to come up with something to say. "Hello," she repeated. Hello, he said in a stammer, trying to find the right words for this pretty woman. She stepped aside, opening the door a bit more with a curious look, as her back went straight suddenly. Then there was a nod from her head, and she made sure to fully open the door. "Please come in. Your presence has been requested." And she said it simply, as if it was commanded, and it was a rather dumbfounding thing to say, since he hadn't heard anyone calling to her. There was no noises, and the music was gone, but what was he to do? He decided in a second to study what he could see inside this building to see if he could trust this woman. The inside looked nice, nothing out of the ordinary. What was in front of him, which was a sitting room of sorts. The presence of a warmth drifted out the open door and drew him to come inside, which he tried to resist. Who has requested my presence, miss?" he managed, but only after finding himself taking a step towards going inside. "The one whom you seek. Many call her the wandering lost soul of the woods. There are other names for her, but I call her Oma Henrietta," the young woman said. He found he stepped into the house and was inside this sitting room, taking a further look about the place. It was all quite odd. He didn't exactly want to be here, since there was such an odd feeling of foreboding coming from all around him. Behind him, the door snapped shut with a click, and the young woman pointed towards a nearby chair. "Sit. The lady will be with you in a minute." "Well, I don't think I need to disturb her. I just need directions to the path back to my home and parents. If it isn't too big of a deal, you could just point me in any direction, and it would be appreciated. Miss... What's your name?" "My name is Perilous, and you will forget it after you leave this house. It will do you no good to remember it, so it is the way it is," this young woman said, and then disappeared through a doorway deeper into the home. He moved over to the chair without thinking about it and found himself sitting and taking in this place. The fire in the fireplace was going at a good rate. The smell of foods cooking came from somewhere, and it felt comfy and cozy. Eden saw that the girl had disappeared down a hallway and was gone from view, but he could clearly see this weird, sort of tilted hallway. He felt the conflicted feelings going on all around him that made him wary yet comfy in this place. It all felt off and to be around, and there was that dark feeling then in the back of his mind, but it was slightly gone now, slightly less worried about. Shaking his head, Eden was sorting through his thoughts and blinking away, trying to concentrate on what he needed to do. Ask for directions. It was simple, it was easy. Nothing complicated. When he turned his head, though, he jumped from the chair as a woman sat in the one across from him as she lounged about in a stretched-out fashion. He collected himself and looked over the slightly older-looking lady than the one that had greeted him at the door. She was very pretty as well, but something was different about her. "Hello?" he asked. "Yes, hello, and welcome to my lovely home. My name is Henrietta, and I'm here to help you," Henrietta replied. A shadow of a movement caught his attention as the young woman, Perilous, joined them. She was standing over this woman's right shoulder. There was a blankness now to Perilous's face as she stood there, making him feel uncomfortable as she just stared off behind him. Yes, help. I do need that very much, Eden said. I appear to have lost my way on the path through the woods to home, and I was hoping that you might tell me how to get back to it? How to get back home, if you could. The lady held up her hand in a finger in the silence of his babbling, and to Eden's surprise he felt like he should shut up. His jaw went slack within a semi-open, ready to say something, but there was nothing to say at the moment, even though he was thinking of words to say. Mostly, what the fuck? The lady had sat up in her chair, lowered her hand, which he dutifully watched, waiting for the finger to go down. Instinctively he knew when it did, he could talk again. "That is not the help you seek, is it?" Henrietta asked, lowering her finger slowly. "Yes, it is. I wish to go home," Eden spilled out. "No, there is another worry that is in the front of your mind." With a shake of his head, he tried to clear his thoughts, all of which felt like they were getting more and more jumbled. Was there something? No. There were town issues and the mayor's daughter, but they weren't going to do anything. Nothing was bad going to ever happen to him. "That's right, your big problem, the mayor's daughter," Henrietta said. Was she reading his mind? This was too creepy for his liking, and well, the mayor's daughter, for as much as she murmured about plots to do things to him, she wasn't exactly the type to do things. Not that he'd noticed, anyway. With a wave of her hand, though, a ball suddenly appeared in it, and she held it up for him to see. Eden looked towards it, feeling it pull his attention, and to stare at the foggy ball, which was clearing up a bit now. An image, a moving image, appeared in it. He could make out the blonde-brown hair that reminded him of the mayor's daughter, Drusilla. She had a knife and appeared to be repeatedly stabbing a doll that looked vaguely similar to him, but it could have been anybody, couldn't it? Eden couldn't tell, but he decided it definitely sort of looked like him. "She wants you dead, as you can see," came the whispered voice of this woman. That sound of her voice broke his gaze, and he shook his head, trying to get the icky feeling that had begun to crawl over him off of him. He looked to Henrietta, who evenly met his gaze and had a crooked smile playing across her mouth. "I am a witch, and I can help you with this matter. That is, before you can ask how I know all of this. It is in my nature to know, and you have found your way to me, because you need help. Though perhaps it is an unconscious finding, since you are apparently unaware," she said. Her voice was now mostly normal, but still a bit husky. Eden gulped at all of this, since it felt so wrong. He didn't need help in this way. Though he had fought and lost against Drusilla before in a wrestling match. Maybe he needed some help, but didn't these kind of deals always have some sort of downside to them? There would be no agreeing to that if that was the case. I think I should go," Eden finally managed. He tried to get up, but before he could, Perilous, who had been behind Henrietta, was now behind him, holding him down. The room also seemed to shift, losing not its warmth, but its look. In a blink of an eye, it was now a worn room filled with vials and shelves of items, with the cauldron sitting by a fire. If he had to guess, this was much more of a witch's room. "I think you need my help," Henrietta said. "If you don't, you will die, and you don't want that, do you? I have something that will help you keep yourself safe from her grasp." "What's the cost?" he asked as he glowered at her. Why weren't they letting him go? It was a simple matter, and he should be free, since he obviously wasn't going to accept this solution, even with the threat to his life, which was giving him some thoughts as to why did the mayor's daughter want him dead. He never could quite understand Drusilla, and what made her the way she was. "Oh, it is nothing major, and you will be fine. I have a potion I've been meaning to have tested, and never have had quite the right person for it come to me. That is the cost. You seem to be the perfect person for it," she said. There was another wave of her hand which made the bowl vanish, and then, suddenly, she was holding out a vial for him. The interior of it was silvery in appearance, and seemed to be quite liquid with the way it moved about, despite sitting still in her hand. Eden stared at the thing, wondering if he should take it. His mind said no, but he was also curious. Could this potentially protect him from lots of things, and not just Drusilla? "What kind of protection is it?" he asked after a moment of thinking that she already knew the question he was going to ask. There was a soft smile on her lips, and Henrietta seemed to lose her good looks a bit, but only for a second. He was sure in the blink of an eye she sort of aged to look like an old hag, but it was only for a second. And so he waited for her answer, but she only held this vial out for him to take. His hand, of its own accord, snaked out and grabbed it. "There you go. As for the protection it affords you, well, it is rather complicated. Think of it as a cloak to hide you away from your enemies. It shifts things a bit so that they don't see you." With the potion in his hand, he could only wonder if all of this was true as he looked it over. He kept playing with the vial, sending the liquid back and forth from the bottom to the top and then back to the bottom. There was always the warning that the old folks had given to the children in town. Don't trust what you find in the woods or from outsiders who don't live in town. "Death awaits you. I know how and when Drusilla is coming for you. I'll even give you a hint. At the upcoming festival, she's plotting to invite you behind the tavern, where she will stab you." The words sounded like they were right next to his ear, despite the fact that she was still sitting across from him, a little ways away. Why would she want to kill me, though?" Eden stuttered as he said this. The whole thought and feel of this was so alien to him. He wanted protection, and this potentially offered it, but it didn't feel right. "That I do not know," came the disappointing reply. He'd been hoping for answers, since that would at least give him an excuse on whether or not to down the potion. But with no firm answer, all he could do was stare and try and think his way around this. You read my thoughts, though, and knew I was coming here," he said after a struggle to come up with even that. "Well, she has never come clumping through the woods looking for answers to problems that her mind knew were her troubles, yet refused to acknowledge it. You, on the other hand, did. And when a person gets close, then I can read on their future, past, and present. It is up to you, though. If you want to survive for another few nights, that might be your only solution," Henrietta said. A cold chill ran through him as the choice was now clearly in his hands. No matter how many questions he was going to ask, it seemed like that was as far as he was going to get with answers. He didn't like this, since he wasn't good at decisions. But there was also unseen threats, and he didn't know how he handled those yet. His life was apparently in danger. It didn't feel that. It didn't fit, but it also did. Drusilla was always making eyes at him while holding some sort of knife or other tool that was pointy. Mainly it appeared to be kitchen forks and knives, but those could still do serious damage and possibly kill. He looked around at the now uncomfortable-looking space that shifted to look more like what he imagined a witch's home would be. A squalid place that was mostly ruins, and with the two ladies now leering at him, much older looking and waiting his decision. With a sigh, he uncapped the vial and downed the substance by pouring it down his throat. The trickle of liquid went down easily, though it tasted of dirt, or perhaps beets. He wasn't sure on that front, and made a face as a result, which was a welcome distraction from whatever was going on here. Then pain struck him, and doubled him over as he sat on the chair. An odd fire felt like it was running through his body. It felt slightly off. It gripped at him, all over him, twisting and pulling and pushing in each part of his body. He felt his feet sort of shift, his calves thinning and his legs becoming weirder and his hips wider maybe, and he couldn't really tell what was going on with his stomach or his crotch, but his chest. A heavy weight came to his chest, and then to his head, and while this wooden chair, which had been rough to sit on, was not so bad now. Perilous, I think there's been a mix-up in potential files we've given to our, victim, maybe. We really should do some labeling on them, Henrietta said, though her voice sounded different to him. He was still trying to adjust to things that now all felt much bigger. His hands, for example, which he stared at, looked so much smaller than he was used to. And the pain had now subsided, and he found himself staring at both his hands, trying to decipher them, because they did not look like his hands. His mind ordered his fingers to move, and the hands in front of him made those fingers move. "What has happened to me?" Eden asked. The sudden feminine voice that asked this question he'd tried to ask sent his mind tumbling down a deep, dark cavern of what was going on? And he glanced downward, but why couldn't he see past his chest? Why was there suddenly so much hair, curly hair, that was now also getting in the way of his eyes? His hands moved to try and push his newly found hair behind his ears so he could see once again. "Well, that potion that you drank had an effect, which may or may not have been what we wanted," Henrietta said. "But here, drink this." He took it and stared at the stone cup that had been handed to him. There was a substance that looked like water, but he wasn't sure he trusted it. A tip of the cup from the left to the right, the liquid was rather slow one that made it seem very unlike any water he'd ever known. "What is this?" he asked. "Will this turn me back from whatever you've done to me?" "Well, maybe," Henrietta said. That was all he needed, and drank the stuff, which took a good little while to make sure he got all of it out of the bottom of the cup. "Oh dear, I just had a thought. That potion, I hope, wasn't the one that makes your inner dreams happen. But though it does appear to have had that same cloaking effect potentially, but who knows? But if it is the one to make your dreams happen, I might not be able to undo it. We shall see, though, since the only way to be sure of that is by creating a potion to counter that one, and that's, it's dangerous for you to go out there. So I think you should stay here for a while," Henrietta said. Eden was concentrating on his body, hoping to feel those same things before, the fiery feeling and the expansion and contraction of parts of him. But all he felt was sluggish and unresponsive, which was the opposite of what had originally happened. Instead of that fire, there was a dullness that came over his mind, and all he could do was stare at the old hag that was now in front of him. "Perilous, we really need to organize those files, but I guess we have someone who can now do that for us. I can't exactly let this one out in the world. She looks too similar to her old self, and then people might go witch hunting. They might find me, because of their needs to have problems solved. Always a problem with being a witch. All my work in this happens. Well, that's the way things go. Perhaps you should show her around and give her a new name, since she will be your responsibility," Henrietta said, and then stood up and breezed out of the room. All Eden felt like he could do was sit there, in the back of his mind screaming that something was wrong. The front of his mind, though, was beginning to think feminine thoughts. He was not sure if they were or weren't. He was unfamiliar with such things. He felt a hand pull him to his feet, and he nearly fell over trying to stand. "You will be called Eve from now on," Perilous said. "It may take years with the way this witch works. You might get your body back after all is said and done, but maybe not. We will have to wait and see. She, or the new Eve, was led towards the back of the room where all of the vials and vases and everything that needed to be organized stood. Felt right to be there, and his only thoughts were that it would be nice to do as she was told. The end of The Witch's Brew. Thank you for listening.